Welcome to the Unit 4 podcast, Chocolate and the Aztec Empire. The learning outcomes for this unit are: Number 1, understand the origins of the Aztec Empire. Recognize the importance of chocolate and Octli to the Aztecs. Describe the pre-Columbian use of chocolate as a currency. Discuss the difficulties in using Spanish sources for Aztec life. The great Aztec Empire flourished during the last 2 centuries before first contact with Europeans, from approximately 1345 CE to the Spanish conquest of Mexico in 1521 CE. Aztec armies were able to dominate their neighboring states and impose Aztec ideals and religion across Mexico. At its greatest extent, the Aztec Empire covered most of northern Mesoamerica. They were highly accomplished in agriculture and trade. Like their Maya predecessors, the Aztecs were also noted for their art and architecture, which ranks among some of the finest ever produced on the continent. The Aztecs were also the last great civilization in Mesoamerica, but they would be defeated by the Spanish in 1521. Legends suggest that the Aztec people originated in the north and then moved south to occupy Mesoamerica. The Aztecs appear relatively late in Mesoamerican history, arising as a militaristic empire during the 14th century. They expanded by conquering neighboring cities and tribes, and demanding tribute from smaller cities and tribes. The Aztecs also differed from the Maya in that they built a unified empire, with one king or emperor who ruled over them all. The Aztec capital city was called Tenochtitlan. It was built on an island in Lake Texcoco in the Valley of Mexico. In fact, present-day Mexico City is built on top of it. At the time of Spanish conquest in 1519 CE, Tenochtitlan contained around 200,000 people and covered an area of 12 square kilometers, or 5 square miles. The city must have been magnificent at its height. This is an artist's impression of what it might have looked like. In some ways, it resembled Venice, Italy, in that the streets were canals. The city itself was connected to the mainland by a series of causeways. The Aztecs were also very fond of the chocolate drink, which they called chocotle. It formed an important place in Aztec culture. However, it shared the stage with another celebrated drink, Octli, known today by its more common name, pulque. Octli was an alcoholic beverage made from the sap of the agave plant. It was fermented in a process similar to how beer or wine is made. The drinks chocolate and Octli were so important in Aztec societies that for the most part, the drinking of them was reserved for the upper class, the elite class, and the warriors. Octli consumption in particular was strictly regulated, reserved for public events and ceremonies. Drunkenness, especially amongst common people, was very much frowned upon and could be punished harshly. Both drinks were clearly considered elite and important beverages, best reserved for special occasions. The image to the right is of a married couple drinking chocolate at their wedding. Cacao, in fact, was not widely farmed within Aztec territory, so much of it needed to be imported. This further cemented cacao's status as a luxury good. For the Aztecs, cacao had all the desired qualities of a currency. It was a valued commodity, which was rare, but not too rare. It was portable and easily exchanged. As such, it became the default currency for the empire. Its utility as a currency was even recognized later by the Spanish, who also adopted it as a currency when they were dealing with the natives. Like the Maya, the Aztecs poured their chocolate from a height to create a foam head. Evidence from Spanish sources suggests that the Aztecs liked to flavor their chocolate with many different spices. Examples include chili peppers, honey, and various local flowers, including vanilla. Like other Mesoamerican cultures, the Aztecs were polytheistic, which means they believed in many gods. The Aztecs, in fact, had an organized state religion with many priests and temples. Their chief god was known as Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and sun. As with their Mayan predecessors, sacrifices were an important part to their religion and were organized around annual festivals. There were up to 20,000 sacrifices per year, which were drawn primarily from prisoners of war. Although there were many different methods, the most common was to stretch the victim over a stone and remove their heart with a sharp knife. The body was then thrown down the pyramid steps. The alcoholic beverage Octli was sometimes given to sacrificial victims beforehand. And now one final note about the difficulty in interpreting sources on Aztec culture, specifically sources which one might call hostile. The Aztec state is, by far, the most well-documented Mesoamerican civilization, with sources including both archaeology, Aztec writings, and lengthy and detailed accounts from their Spanish conquerors, both military men and Christian clergy. It's these latter Spanish sources which can be problematic, since they are by far the most prevalent source material. And if we're getting right down to it, most of what we know about the Aztecs really comes from Spanish sources. Now, naturally, the Spanish conquerors who first encountered the Aztecs interpreted everything they saw through their own European biases. The culture they met was very different in some ways than their own. For both peoples, Aztecs and Spanish, there were aspects of each other's culture that they did not understand, misinterpreted, or even found abhorrent. A good example is human sacrifice. Human sacrifice was unknown in European culture, and the Spanish were shocked when they found it in Aztec culture. It is from the abundance of sources depicting these practices that much of the bloodthirsty and cruel images of Aztecs have been generated, which persist to this day. But is it a fair depiction? Some historians have pointed out that nearly all cultures practice war and killing. Certainly European countries were no exception. However, when Mesoamerican cultures went to war, they preferred capturing rather than killing their enemies. The captured warriors could then be later sacrificed to the gods to ensure the continued survival of the people. That is not to suggest that we should applaud human sacrifice, only that we should put it into proper historical context. Similarly, early Spanish encounters with chocolate were predominantly negative. The Spanish described their bitter, foul-tasting drink of the natives, and this has led to a misconception that the Spanish fixed the chocolate by adding sugar, a development that the so-called less sophisticated Mesoamerican culture did not make. But more recent evidence have suggested that this is a gross oversimplification of the complex cultural exchange that occurred. When the Spanish began to drink chocolate, they did so by adopting the flavor values of the Mesoamericans. Sugar only came much later.